Hello, hello, and welcome everybody to another live Cypher session. Today, we have a wonderful talk that is not talked about nearly enough, a wonderful conversation here. We were talking about a year ago, just in general, in the Web3 industry, if you will, about what do you do when you find a bug in prod? So I was asking around, what do you do when you find a bug in prod? And we saw a number of people say, I know what to do. I will white hat it first. And it went really, really bad. It went really poorly. So to actually talk us through that scenario, hey, what do you do? What has been done historically? What's the best route? What are the tools people have to work on moving forward? We have Michael here from OpenZeppelin. Obviously, everyone you all know OpenZeppelin. We're all huge fans of OpenZeppelin. Obviously, we use their contracts. We check out their security reports. Big OpenZeppelin fans. But Michael, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself as well to give people context for who you are.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, Patrick. So yeah, I'll jump right into it. I mean, I've been with OpenZeppelin for a little over 3 years now. My background, I've been doing Bitcoin and blockchain stuff since like 2012. Started out mining Bitcoin on school computers and then kind of grew into it from there. Got into Ethereum smart contracts, worked on a lot of projects prior to coming to OpenZeppelin, but eventually found my niche here where I've been very focused on first working very closely with the security team as their first technical project manager. Worked on basically all the audits we had in our pipeline for like a full year and a half. And then eventually I moved on to kind of my current role, which is head of solutions architecture, but that leaves me in a position to still do quite a lot of hands-on work. But now working directly with some of our biggest clients like Compound to help manage our partnership with them as a DAO, which has a lot of interesting experiences as a vendor working with the DAO doing security. And then also working a lot with other top clients. And this is involved usually being involved in crisis incidents. So I've been sucked into quite a few of those, either related to a client or our library, or God knows what else. So yeah, very happy to talk about it. I have a lot of thoughts to share. A lot of things I've also heard from other people in the industry that I think have become somewhat common practice. We're still working on best practice or standard practice as we work through things. But yeah, happy to jump in and share. And for those of you who don't know, OpenZeppelin is we use smart contracts, we do security audits. We have a new Defender product that we've had out there for a couple years that we're very happy with. And yeah, hoping to help solve a few of those problems along the way too, in terms of incident response and how we train teams to be prepared for it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the introduction there. Yeah, we were when I was at first asking around. Obviously, I'm very tight with Tincho, so I was like Tincho, and some of you watching, hopefully, you know him because he did a lot of guest experiences on the Updraft courses, on the security courses. I was like, Tincho, who do I talk to? And he was like, Michael from OpenZeppelin, definitely. And I was like, oh yeah, I met Michael at Eat Denver like maybe a year ago, or two years ago, 1 year ago, I don't know, whatever. Um, but awesome. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, excited to be talking with you here. So a heavy hitter. We're definitely going to be. I'm very excited because we're going to be getting the source of truth, if you will, because like you said, you've been in these these disaster recovery scenarios. Hey, there's an exploit happening right now. What do we do? Right. So I would love to jump into it right there. So let's start from a high level. Hey, there's a bug in production code. There we have our smart contract. Maybe it has 500 million TVL or AUM or whatever you want to say. There's a bug in it. Oh my goodness, somebody can drain the funds. What happens? What's the process? What do you do? Just to hit you with the wonderfully hard question out the gate. What's the process, Michael? Tell us.
All right. Well, I always like to, as a good consultant should, I always answer questions with questions. But it comes down to like, okay, who's the project? Um, do we know who they are? So, like, is this a smart contract that you can quickly identify? Let's say you found it on EtherScan or something like that, and you're like, okay, whose is it? Hopefully, if it's a prominent project, it's like got a tag, so you can like look at the EtherScan tag and trace it back. If it's not so obvious, then you might have to do a little Google searching. You might have to look into common docs. You might have to like interpret a lot of things in the contract. But let's say you track it down. You've got a website to start with. You're like, okay, this is the project. This is the website. How do I get in contact with them?
Well,
Is this Discord?
let
Yeah.
me dissect that a little bit though. So the first question you're asking is, who is it? Do we know who they are?
Yeah.
Why is that important?
Um, well, unlike a lot of other things in the world, like smart contracts don't always have the contact info contained. Now, some teams are smart enough if they're verifying their code, will include contact details or email in the actual source code, which I would always recommend. There's even a thing in the OpenZeppelin contracts wizard that encourages you to fill out, so it's automatically included. So that cuts a lot of this down easy. Email, quick, I'm there. Um, but yeah, otherwise, if you start blabbing about, hey, there's this bug, to whoever you think is the right person, you might inadvertently share an exploit with someone that could take advantage of it. It really depends. So you're identifying who controls this contract and who could do something about it potentially, which is the other big question, is always going to be your first step, because at that point, the responsible disclosure requires you to do everything necessary to make sure you identify the right person and share that info with them and only them, because they're really the only ones that should have the right to have it. And we can get into bug bounty programs and other things from there, but that's always the most important thing. And I think when you're thinking, should I white hat this or do other things? That's maybe a topic we can get into later. But I would say the first thing you should always do is notify the client. And if you're not entirely sure if you're reaching out to the right client, just say, hey, I think I found a bug. I'd like to share details, but can you prove who you are first? And there's a variety of ways you could do that. Maybe signing something with the deployer key, or sending something from an established email or contact, tons of things. But just first and foremost, who's the right person to go to, who has some responsibility for this? And if it's a DAO, then hopefully who does the DAO say has responsibility for dealing with that? And that's a whole other story.
Gotcha. So the reason we want to figure out the right person is hopefully, well, or maybe not hopefully, there's likely somebody responsible for it, somebody who can do something about it. You want to responsibly disclose so that you can work together to solve it. Is that kind of the gist of it? Okay. So what do you do in the scenario? And like I said, we're going through the hard scenarios right away where, oh, there's no security contact, it's ungoverned, if you will. There's no way to update it. What happens then? And then obviously you would get to this point after a long time of trying to identify this person, trying to contact this person. Hey, this is just raw code, right? And that's the beauty of Web3 there. That's the goal, right? There's supposed to be, hey, this is raw code. What do you do if nobody's responsible for it? If this is truly an ungoverned protocol, if there's no way to upgrade it, if there's no way to tweak it?
Yeah. This is a tough question, and it's something that the OpenZeppelin contracts team has had to deal with in the past when there might have been exploits identified, and they look on chain and say, "I think we found a few affected contracts, but we don't know anything about them." There are some of them that just there's nothing to go off of. So, I mean, at that point, there are sometimes ways that you could contact them through an Etherscan message or something else, but beyond that, um, it's really, I think it comes down to, okay, who's the next best contact for this, and at least give them a warning that maybe they need to pull their funds out if there's a community, or something behind it. Trying to discreetly talk to someone who's a leader in that community, saying, "Hey, I think there's an issue here. We're not sure if anyone can fix it. It looks like it's a mutable code, but people should look at withdrawing their funds, and ideally, don't give any details around how that could be done. There's always a balancing act because some people might not believe you, etc. So you always have to kind of play that by ear. But generally, just saying, "Hey, everyone, I think there's an exploit here. You need to remove your funds. You need to protect yourselves. Whatever options you have available, please do so."
I almost feel like that's like one of the scariest things white hats are afraid of. Like once they do find the bug, you kind of you'll enter this oh shit like panic mode where it's okay, what do I do? And I am about to have to do a ton of work where everything that I do is going to be scrutinized afterwards. I'm probably going to do the wrong thing. I'm going to do my best to do the right thing, but everything has a ton of pressure. The clock is ticking, and like you're saying, hey, like you need to spend a lot of time identifying this right person. Finding the right person might be really, really difficult. You said you ran into situations where finding the right person was almost impossible, and and this is just step one,
Yes.
right? We haven't even talked about just getting into this. This is tough. Like how does one approach this? Is this something that sorry, I'm derailing a little bit here. Is this something that you think is good for people to do to look for these bugs and prod? Is this just so much work that it's going to be terrifying? Is the process too open-ended that it's just like terrifying and you're probably all going to screw it up no matter what? Is there any advice you can give to people looking to protect these live contracts just from this first step on reaching out to the correct contact?
Yes, I mean, I think I mean, it's going to be valuable. It is potentially a lot of hard work if you come across something. Essentially, you found a bomb and you need to defuse it. Make sure no one else triggers the bomb beforehand. I think it comes down to, like, what are you the most comfortable doing? I mean, the more involved you get, the more at least some security researchers in this industry, I think everyone's motivated by protecting people, but there's also like, hey, you might get a payout for your good work here. You might get recognition as a security researcher that solved this issue. Those are also good motivations to have on top. But to whatever extent that you're willing to go is good, as long as you feel you can do it confidently and responsibly. But once you've reached the end of that, either I don't feel like I'm able, I don't feel like I'm just confident, I feel like I don't want to do something that would potentially cause the situation to become worse, which is kind of the problem with researchers is you want to take the Hippocratic Oath, don't make it worse, hopefully. But to then inform, okay, who's the next best person to inform, which is usually community. I think one of the best default options there is going to be the SEAL 911 team, just reaching out to them and saying, hey, there's an issue. This is what I know. And there's some great industry leaders like Samsung and others that are a big part of that, making sure the right information gets to the right people. Maybe they know contacts you don't. Maybe they know folks that you can reach out to. So that is, I think, definitely one of the best defaults. And then beyond that, maybe if you know, hey, this isn't Scroll, and I know the head of security for Scroll, or I have their contact info, maybe reach out to them. Maybe they know. If you see that this is like a big impact on other projects that are related, maybe reach out to them. So that's where you start to look at, okay, who's the next best one? SEAL
Yeah.
911, and then maybe some other part of that ecosystem, someone who's going to be related.
You mentioned you mentioned two things I definitely want to come back to, both SEAL 911 and incentives. But great. So let's say, for the sake of the conversation, we've got them. We've got them on the line. It's some elected member of the DAO who's responsible for security, the elected security person. You got them on the line. You are connected with the correct person. Now what?
All right. First is, I guess, what do you call it? Make sure that the windows and blinds are down. If you get them in a channel, make sure that it's like Telegram chats or war rooms. Make sure whoever's in there needs to be there or is trusted, which would mainly be relying on that other person. Like, is everyone you've brought in trusted? Is there someone technical here? Is there someone that can handle communications or management? That's mainly on them because you're really the one going out of your way just to report something. But that's always good to just double check for your own awareness to make sure before you share anything concrete on how the exploit works, this is a safe place to speak and talk about it. And then once you've done that, then saying, okay, as succinctly and as clearly as I can, these are the details. If you have to share them like a POC or something, I highly advise doing it through a zip file or something that's attached. You could share through GitHub and other things. That's also okay. But I would generally say be very careful about how you share those details. Don't create any public links by accident or anything that someone could crawl through. And then once the details are in front of them, it's really on them to like take a look. I would generally say summarize. This is how it works. This is the impact. Here's a little bit more info. And then I'm sure that a call would probably be in order. They'd want to talk through it. They want to describe what are the options, anything. And then if you know of any options they might have to address it, just based on your existing research, go from there. Hopefully, if their team is on the line, they have a lot of information themselves on how the contracts work and how to fix it. But some teams, I've been on things where teams hadn't looked at that smart contract code in years. The people that were originally on their team that had built it were gone. You will be surprised how many times you show up and you know more about their code base than they do, just because they haven't looked at it in a long time. So to the extent that you're willing and able, being a resource for them on what you know is going to make a big difference in how quickly it gets addressed.
Gotcha. Makes sense. So get on a call, get on a secure channel with them, close the windows and blinds, ideally share the code in a secure fashion, maybe through a zip file, not through GitHub or something like that. They see it. They recognize, ideally with a POC. All you security researchers should definitely always be building POCs. Ideally with a POC. Great. They see it. Oh my God, you're right. This is a bug. Now what?
Now we need a fix. And the fix could be a lot of things. It could be there's a multisig that can call a pause function and cut this off at the source, and it's no longer a problem. Which might be a temporary fix. It might just be like, let's pause everything while we get a real fix in place. Or it could be hey, this is a parameter change and now it's not a problem anymore. Totally depends. But those are the usually slightly easier ones. If it's not a simple fix, if it's like, oh, we do need to put a fix out, it's a little complex, and there's going to be some time there. So again, hoping you've really locked down the batch, locked everything down. The idea is to just as speedily as possible come up with a fix that is not going to make things worse. That's the other thing. But just to say, okay, like we've reviewed it. their team should ideally be the ones writing it, but you can make suggestions. I would stay away from writing people's code for them because that infers a little bit of liability. But say, hey, this is what I suggest. This is what you should do. Could definitely help. And then to help verify it for them, if they have auditors or other people they've worked with in the past that understand that code, it's always good to get their input and review it. So it can be a few days sometimes to get a lot of things safely reviewed, and naturally keeping that fix and that code and all the context around it as quiet as possible out of public repos. Sometimes people will see a PR and they'll be like, "Oh, interesting. Let me look at that," and then suddenly they realize they can reverse engineer that exploit. And then the next thing is just deploying it and getting it fixed in as short and as sweet a way as possible. There are definitely some interesting considerations we can get into when you have a governance proposal going through a 7-day process and how you might handle that situation. But in general, it's basically like, okay, what is the fix? Get it out there as soon as possible. Get it out there as quietly as possible, and ensure that we've made sure that this isn't going to introduce its own problems. My favorite example is the parity multisig issue from 2017. Awful learning situation for everyone involved. A company that was founded by the CTO of Ethereum and Geth. Had this big library issue, millions of dollars lost. They put out a fix that actually introduced another bug that allowed an attacker to freeze millions more funds. So you never want to make the situation worse. So always don't let the urgency of the situation fool you. If the exploit's live and you actually see that there are black hats potentially using it or the information's gotten out, then maybe there's a different story and you have to make some tough choices. But I would generally say as long as you have a decent chance or understanding that no one else knows about this yet, then definitely just making sure that once you take action, it's going to be final and not create any further problems.
The hard part about this is the more we kind of walk down the tree, the decision making tree, the more uncertain the decisions seem to be getting. Right? Okay, we'll make a fix. Maybe don't write it. Maybe suggest it. If there's pausing, maybe pause it. Are black hats actively pulling funds out? Maybe expedite it, but don't go too fast because maybe you're going to make it worse. And is that an accurate assessment? The more decisions and the more that's involved, the harder it gets.
I think so. I think it's mainly down to pressure. It's like stick to what you know, and if you don't know that fix is to the best of your ability, which is the core piece that you need to be confident on, like what I know and what I don't know, that's the best step forward. So each step needs to be, not, you don't want to take your time, but at the same time, you want to be real confident on each one. As a security researcher, at least in what you recommend and tell a client, because there are people out there or there are projects out there that might be panicking, and if you say, "Hey, I think this is the right option," but you haven't thought through it, they might just take that and run before realizing there's further consequences. And I think also take it upon yourself to tell that person, "Hey, I am suggesting things, I am helping as much as I can, but you and your team need to understand and be confident with this as well before you take action. I'm not, I'm advising and trying to help here, and hopefully there's a reward or something after, but I'm not, this is ultimately your project. I'm just here to help."
I was helping somebody debug some testnet code they had last night, and I was like, "Oh yeah, here's like an example of a script that like might solve it." And they just responded with, "Okay, now what?" And I was like, did you run it? But I only felt confident to even send them the script because like, all right, it's testnet, it's fine, like it's all good. Nothing damning is going to happen from this. But yeah,
I would say this is maybe more legal advice, so talk to a lawyer to really get the full thing. But like including any documentation you send or anything, like including disclaimers to say this is best effort, this is, there's no warrant, no liability, any code is like marked and said like, this is as is, you're responsible for however you use it, essentially.
Taking a note here too. Hey, if you're going to send anybody code, cover your ass, right?
Yes.
At the end of the day, hey.
And when you deploy code too, I mean, there's so many code out there where they didn't put the license in the source code, and it's like, well, here's the other thing. Like, if I'm a white hat and I look at code that has a license that actually doesn't permit someone to just look at it and think, "Oh, I see a bug," like just doing anything, even reporting the bug to the original author, could be seen as a license violation. So leaving it ambiguous is a very I think a amateur mistake that a lot of people in the industry still make, just because it creates that legal uncertainty. Likely no one would do anything, but you never know.
I mean, this is what makes white hatting so much harder too. We're saying, hey, be super careful. There's all these things you need to think about. You're under a ton of pressure. also you can get sued for trying to help, which is almost like this horrible Good Samaritan thing going on here. But yeah, I want to come back to that. So real quick, rapid fire, probably not rapid fire, right? You say, hey, I think you guys should do this. This is this vulnerability. This has happened. I've seen a lot of security researchers actually run into this specific scenario, either on bug bounties or in prod code, and they go, yep, it's probably an issue. Thanks. And and they just don't answer whether or not they're going to fix it. Maybe a week goes by, they still don't fix it. You follow up, hey, like people are going to lose money. You acknowledge this, like what are you doing? And they go, yo, yeah, like, see you later. And they don't really respond, or they ignore you. They say it's not a big deal. Do you disclose? Do you tell the public, hey, there's an issue? Everyone pull out of this contract. What do you do there? Do you do the public disclosure? When do you do the public disclosure? Is there a rule of thumb around public disclosure?
That's a real tough one. It comes down to a lot of different things. I mean, if there's a bug bounty program or something else, there's usually some sort of NDA or process that, just by using the system, you might have become like, you might have agreed to or done in the terms and conditions. So always being aware of that. But I would say, independent of any of those obligations that you might have already made with someone or through a platform, I think it comes down to, okay, like what type of threat are we genuinely talking about? Like, this is a world ending critical that's going to blow up any day? Are we talking about more of an edge case? Because there are times where an edge case can seem really bad, or an issue you see is really bad, but when you actually look at how the team is operating the code, it's actually more of like, well, if very very specific conditions happen, then it could be bad, but the team's actually monitoring it. For example, like, hey, if you made this parameter change, things would blow up, but they're like, no, we're aware, we'll never make it. Still not great for it to even exist as a possibility, but yeah, there's an important thing where you have to just remember that as smart as you might be, sometimes the client might know best, but at the same time, there's always the opportunity that they don't know best. They're not operating in good faith. They're not thinking of their community in the way that you think they should, or just anyone would probably think. Um, and yeah, at that point, then you start to have to think about the hard choice of how to disclose. I think you can disclose on your own, but I also think you have to think about like what is the potential harm. So Seal 911 might still be a good one where you're like, hey, I know of this project. I've already told their team. They don't think it's a big deal. Do you think it's a big deal? I think getting a third party's opinion that you can trust is useful there. Someone who's a broader part of the community, or yeah, a clear security resource like 911. And then at that point, I think if you've given the team a decent amount of notice, I think you should tell them, hey, by this date, we are going to disclose this. I think being upfront about that, even if they're like, we're gonna sue you, we're gonna do this. If you think it's important enough, then I think as long as you're upfront saying I'm gonna do this because I think people need to know, then one, it gives them an opportunity to realize, well, maybe we should fix it because he's gonna publicize it. And that prevents the issue. And then two, yeah, people are going to find out. And we've been in I think the most trickiest situation that we've had, like with the third web issue we had a few months back, was okay. We think we've patched as many possible projects as we can find, but we might not have gotten all of them. There's a few people we can't get to contact us, and eventually at some point it was like, okay, it seems like people are starting to exploit this issue and are going to learn more. Like it looks like the cat's out of the bag. Then it's at that point where, like, even though a lot of people were like, hey, we want more time to double check, we want more time to be safe, it's like, okay, no, we got to go public because there's people we haven't been able to reach out to, and the only way they'll find out is going public. So that's an even harder choice, where it's not just one party on whether they fix or will, but many many different ones. And eventually you just got to decide, okay, we've done our best to do this discreetly, now we got to go public and let people know, and really put the word out.
And I just posted a link in the chat here where for OWASP, OWASP.org. I actually don't remember what it stands for at the moment. Something cybersecurity.
Defensive web application security protocol process,
something like that. Just like a great resource for security online. And there's a vulnerability disclosure cheat sheet. And I think what's interesting is on here, if you scroll down, there's a part that just says when to give up. And I feel like in Web 2, in like traditional cyber, like giving up might be okay, because it's just like, hey, like there's security vulnerability, your user shouldn't use this. But in Web3, we feel this bigger need to take action because it's like, hey, like there's maybe $1 billion at stake. People's livelihoods are going to get wrecked over this. And they feel like there's a greater urgency to go public, and giving up almost isn't an option.
Yeah.
And I've wanted to have a cheat sheet like this for Web3, but everyone I talk to, I feel like there's no if this then that. It's just this kind of this huge subjective. There's so many. There's no. It doesn't feel like there's an objective. Full disclosure when this, private disclosure when this. It feels like you just said with Third Web, it was an active thing happening. You originally didn't do a full disclosure. Then later on, you were like, cat's out of the bag. People need to know now. We're going to do a full disclosure. In retrospect, it seems like that was the right call. But at point in time, you guys were probably going back and forth. Is that accurate?
Yep. No, yeah, we were hoping to have another week on that, and there was a whole thing where, Third Web, the actual project that used our library, had disclosed it. They went public on, hey, there's an issue. Use this tool to check for it. We're not saying anything, but they gave us like maybe a couple of hours notice before they did that, and we were like, okay, the cat's kind of like, the details aren't out there, but there are clues that have been left that allows people to start thinking heavily about what that might be. So the race was kind of on there, and that did make it difficult to do as thorough a job as we would have liked. And they had their own reasons for doing it, and I'm not going to debate those. But I think it was down to everyone's trying to protect their own liability as well as their own communities in the best way they see fit, and people are just sometimes not going to agree on what that is.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, it's just going to come down to, okay, like how do I make sure I protect myself while still helping as much as I can? And that's, like, I think at the end of the day is you make your own bed and you make sure that you're going to be okay and do everything you can beyond that, which might come down to just asking your lawyer, what would you do, or what should I do, if you have one. Hopefully if you get into the big stuff, you start at least talking to someone that can help you out, because you never know, people can take even a helping hand in the wrong way.
Yeah. All right. So finishing going down the path here of, back to our imaginary scenario, we found an issue, we reported it, we got in contact. They go, oh my gosh, you're right. This is a bug. Here's the POC. Wow. Here's a fix. We have a 7-day governance waiting period. And that has happened to you, right? Two things then. Could you share a little bit about that experience, and then what the learnings from that experience were? What do you do in that scenario? Oh, you cut out a little bit there. Sorry, what was that?
That's a tricky one. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yep. You're good.
Yeah, that was one where we had a couple years back, we had an issue with TrueUSD where there was a double entry point in the token on Compound, and this was we were brought onto the project. We started reviewing tokens.
When was this? Because I remember this. I feel like this was years ago now,
March
right?
of 2022, I think, is when we went public. I think it was happening over the course of February. It was actually an issue that had been discovered by a prior team, Change Security. We actually kind of took the onus there, and the idea was, well, we could patch it in a later proposal. But eventually we were made aware, there's actually far worse consequences for this. It was like, it basically went from a high to a critical as we found more potential implications. And then we also realized, hey, it's not just us. There's tons of other tokens that have listed this, or I'm sorry, tons of protocols that have listed this token, that it could also be impacted to varying degrees. And we identified at least a few examples. And we're like, okay, so we have two options. We can fix it on Compound, and we can do it as quietly as possible. We had a refactor coming up, so it was like, okay, put into the refactor, make it very minor compared to all the other changes, and more than likely no one notices, and it's fixed by the time it's done. And then we can tell the community, okay, there was also a fix included in this refactor, which is always a little dicey when it comes to transparency.
You're almost like trying to pull a fast one on the whole community.
Yep. It's like, well, we've got to have a refactor. And what's really important is to have some counterparty that represents the community's interests to give some approval. So we did have there's a pause guardian multi-sig of like 7 signers that we were able to go to and say, hey, I think this is the approach we need to take. Let's discuss and at least have some consensus among ourselves, since you're already empowered to pause the protocol or do other things if the community needs to in an emergency. So at least having some counterparty to agree to that is important. And obviously still thinking about like making sure it's in the best interest. But luckily we had that option. We had it ready to go. but we were able to identify, hey, if we go directly to the TrueUSD team and inform them of this issue, we're basically going to be like, hey, you have 24 hours or 36 hours to fix this on your end, or we're going to have to take this step. And we're not going to go public about it, at least initially, but eventually it might get out. And if it does go public, we'll pause the protocol immediately and then continue with the governance fix. So we had all these scenarios kind of planned out. Luckily, it took them very little time to decide, yes, we will eliminate the double entry point. There's no, I think there was like maybe one exchange still using it. Everyone else had already moved to the new one. So for them, it was actually not very painful. And they were very what do you call it, responsive and appreciative. So everything worked out. But we had to think about like, okay, just in case it doesn't go well, we have to work with another team. And that fixed it for all the other communities. So there wasn't any contagion effect or any issues like that. So we kind of lucked out, didn't have to go down that road, but there are definitely times where it might still come up. And we have to consider, how are we going to address this in the best place? I think having the ability to pause the protocol in response is definitely always a good option to have. It's not great for decentralization or immutability, but in a case where you have a 7-day governance period for upgrades and you don't have a model for doing emergency upgrades, and at least pausing the affected functionality is going to be your best case. Even though it sucks to have that downtime, at least you don't have to worry about someone reverse engineering it while the fix is going through.
So on upgrades, either with a DAO, without a DAO, just proxy, or even without a proxy, upgrades are kind of a contentious topic where some people go, yeah, proxies are great. Some people will literally put in the audit reports, don't use proxies, don't do upgrades. What's up?
I've had panels with those folks. So yeah.
Yep. Oh, yep. I know you have. Don't touch them. Don't assemblies. Stay far away from that. Although we're talking here, though, we're saying, hey, it's good they had a way to upgrade. The way to upgrade would have also disclosed the vulnerability. Are upgrades good when we're thinking about patching our software? How does that fit into the picture?
It's a tricky one. It comes down to everyone's use case and requirements, and how much resource can you dedicate upfront about what you're building. How much is it a known pattern, or are you doing something very novel, like integrating ZK technology or something that's really on the edge? I think a few principles I like to keep in mind when it comes to should you include upgradability are: one, are you dependent on anything else that is already upgradable or is governed in a way that could impact your protocol? So, for example, any lending protocol out there that's doing what Compound or Aave does, you're depending usually on some tokens that you've listed that are upgradable. You're likely depending on some Oracle providers. You're likely depending on a host of other factors, maybe even bridges if you're cross chain, that all could change. They all are either upgradable or there are admins that could change permissions. USDC could blacklist you tomorrow. You don't know what's going to happen. If you're in that case, I don't think you can get away without, if not upgradability, then at least some admin controls, because you've basically given control to these other protocols to break your protocol through these integrations you've made. So and there's a lot of, this already applies to most projects out of the bat, I think, at this point with DeFi and composability. So to me, that is a point where you at least need to have a lot of options that have been pre-prepared, or just upgradability for the things that you haven't been able to anticipate. But then at that point, it comes down to, okay, how have you set up control of the upgrade process? Is it a single EOA? I really hope not, just sitting on a developer's laptop. Ideally, it's a multi-sig. The members are known and trusted. Time locks are good, but they come with the added downside of it will take time to roll out. So I think if you are introducing a time lock or a governance process, you need to consider possibility, or at least something that can be done in the meantime while that is public. I think it's very hard to avoid that. And I think the last thing to consider is upgradability need not be forever. If you really, really want to, if you're like, hey, we need upgradability now, but eventually over time, we think that some components will become firmer, we will be more confident in our security posture, and there are things that we just think at some point we're not going to have any serious bugs, which I'm not even going to get into how you figure that out, but it just comes down to what you think is best. You can remove upgradability. Like Tornado Cash famously did this, where they did initially start out immutable, and then there was a massive bug found, and they had to self-exploit themselves, move it to a new set of contracts where there was upgradability for a temporary period of time, and then they removed that. And then I think the only thing they kept in their contracts for a while was the ability to change out the verifier contract, where all the really complicated ZKP tech was. And then even at that point, at some point, they removed that role and they basically set it to a zero address and burned it so that nothing, it is truly now immutable
Mm.
forevermore. So these are options that are available, but it does mean that you're going to have a long process after deployment of maintaining this code. So the whole deploy and forget model of immutable contracts that we kind of started with at the beginning of this community actually comes with a lot more steps if you want to do it honestly.
So
Yeah.
you're kind of advocating that the centralization that comes with ultimately adding some type of emergency upgrade, you're saying not a blanket statement of you need it, but you're saying almost definitely if you're relying on other upgradable or even just changeable contracts, you're saying, yeah, you should definitely have it.
Yeah, because otherwise you're delegating control to them. I mean, some good examples like Uniswap v2, they can get away without it. They're just like, yep, I mean, you're deploying a new pool from this factory. We're confident that it's secure. There's no pausability or upgradability, because we're not dependent on anyone. We're our own price feed. Everything kind of operates without caring about anything else happening in the ecosystem. And even then, there might be some risks about, EVM could change or compatibility or gas or whatever. But you could usually solve that by saying we'll deploy a new version, which they do. Um, so yeah, I think that, and you could say something for it's nice to have the ability to release new features and things like
Mm.
that, which also need to be audited and secured to the same level of certainty. But yeah, it comes down to I do think that teams shouldn't throw in upgradability willy-nilly and just say, it's nice to have the option. I think they need to think through why do we want the option? And are we prepared to assume the responsibility of managing that upgrade key and responding when that happens? So if you're upgradable and you need to use it for fixes, then you should have a plan in place. You should have that security contact email out there and prominent so that if the person we've been discussing this whole time has a bug and needs to reach out, you've made it as easy as possible for them to do it responsibly and ideally incentivized it with the bug bounty program as well.
There are a lot of people in the industry I know would fight you tooth and nail on this, right? Where it's, hey, you're going to add a security contact. That's a central point of failure. You've ruined Web3. And I feel like that's just a battle, a conversation that we as an industry, I mean, seriously need to have, especially with the fact that it almost seems like, you know, Euler, Euler, I never pronounce it right. Weller, how do you say it?
I think Euler's right.
Euler, something like that. Euler, I feel like Euler was this example where the whole community went, okay, there's no one correct answer to security. So does that just mean we are always going to get hacked? And if that's the case, do we need to have these in play? But I feel like that might be a much longer conversation. Hey, like, are we sacrificing security for decentrality? Are we sacrificing decentrality for security? What's the conversation there? I have like 18 more things I want to talk to you about, though. So if we need to come back to that, we can. But cool. I mean, everything that we've talked about so far makes a lot of sense. So let me back up. Same imaginary scenario, though. We're going to back up a bit. I am now a bit of a naive or junior white hat, or I call myself a white hat. I exploit a contract because I kind of panic. I go, I need to exploit it. I kind of fumble it a lot. And all of a sudden, I have $1 million in my EOA. And that's more money than I've ever seen in my life. Am I expecting compensation? How do I deal with, oh my gosh, I've seen all these gray hats say, I'll give you the money back if you let me keep 10%. Is there a safe, ethical, good way to go about this situation? How do you deal with gray hats, the thought of wanting to gray hats? What are your thoughts on just a very general, like difficult, open-ended question for you? Gray hats, what are your thoughts? How does that work?
I think I guess I'll start with my thoughts on the practice in general, which is I think first of all the scary thing is just it's hard for a lot of people. Like the person you've described is kind of someone who's probably naive and is just jumping the gun. So like I think the biggest thing is you have to be very careful about what's actually in the best interest of the community, and in most cases, contacting the team or whoever is available first is always the better step. Um, And I think the only time we're not doing that is a requirement is when you see something like in the mempool that you know is about to take those funds, and you can front run it and stop it. And that's usually something you might have had to script because it's going to move so quickly. So that's like the one scenario where okay, you might need to consider doing it just because the other option is the funds will be lost for certain. Like there, you've seen the transaction, you know it's going to happen. Outside of that, gets much fuzzier. And I would say for that naive person who might have done that, I would say you mean you are in a very difficult legal position now. You've essentially you are essentially Schrodinger's hat. Are you a black hat
Right.
or a white hat? Like
I actually do
depends
want
on
to
what you do next.
pause just real quickly though, because I think you just said something that was phenomenal there though. You said basically under no circumstances does it make sense for you to exploit the protocol unless there's already another one in the mempool.
Yeah.
To me, that's probably one of the most concrete things that anybody can take away from this. Do not attempt white hats without having a conversation with the one responsible first and coming to the conclusion that the white hat is the best attempt. That is very tangent. I actually love that just as a blanket rule. The only caveat to that is if you see it in the mempool,
Yeah.
where we've seen a couple groups. I think BlockSec is one of the biggest ones where they actually they've done a front run, but the only reason they were able to do that is exactly that they have scripts that were already doing it. They would have never got those exploits beforehand, but they saw it in the mempool. They went, holy shit, front run them. So just wanted to pause, double tap on that. Absolutely love that for advice. But yes, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good thing to clarify, and that's my rule. But I hope a lot of people other like agree with it. And then from there, it's like okay, there are discussions. I won't say anything now, but there's ideas of like, could there be legal frameworks to say, hey, you can white hat under these conditions, but only if the team states these are the conditions. These are the conditions, kind of like a bug bounty program where we are comfortable with people white hatting our protocol. And if you can't see that, then you haven't gotten that consent. And so let's say you're already in the scenario, you've made that mistake, you probably made multiple mistakes, but you're naive and you were just trying to do your best. The best thing you can do is to show intent, and that is to go immediately to whatever contact you have for that team and say, hey, I took it. I want to give it back to you as soon as possible. I I did it for the best of intentions. I found this bug. I thought someone was going to exploit it. Whatever that story is, and I mean, in a sense, you kind of have to fall on your knees and say and beg forgiveness, even if you don't feel like you did anything wrong, because from a legal perspective, you have until intent, because intent has not clear. Um, and so I think if you take that approach and you say, "Hey, I'd like a reward, but I'm going to give me an address, and I will send all the money to you upfront immediately. And if you think I deserve a reward for what I've done, I would be happy to receive it back at this address. But definitely don't use that time to negotiate, because if you negotiate, then for all intents and purposes, you're now a black hat that's negotiating what do you call it, blackmail or whatever.
Ransom.
Ransom, yeah, ransom.
Ransom.
You're ransoming the money. No, you don't negotiate because you have no right to it. And so that to me would be the best take, is just immediately contact the team, tell them what happened, tell them that you want to return the money as soon as possible, and that's gonna prove to them, okay, this seems like someone who, they might still be mad. There might be like, hey, that you disrupted our protocol, you made us look bad, you did all these other things, but at least they will, from a legal and also, by the way, contact a lawyer immediately if you don't already have one, and be like, hey, just be aware I might have to retain you just to make sure that you cover yourself, including even the communications you have with that team. Like you got to protect yourself, and do your best to show that you meant no harm. So I mean, I would like to think there's a lot of Web3 projects that would look at someone like that and say they're trying their best. But yeah, I would say someone in that scenario has made a few mistakes along the way, and I hope they would all have been done out of naivete. But yeah, at the end of the day, you take something that someone that belongs to someone. It's not like you left. It's not like you found it on the street. It was probably sitting in the protocol. It should have been. You found an unlocked door, and you walked right in and grabbed something.
Code is law. I feel like we have, for a while, like code is law. I feel like we've reached a point. Social consensus is law. That's really the takeaway here. So
the actual laws of the country in which,
and then the actual laws of the country, which there's a bit of a battle there, right? Because we're building the system to be better than but that's another conversation. So Michael, to me, this is This is going on the security course, by the way, just a heads up. 100%. There's a couple super concrete takeaways just from this bit here that I love, and I'm going to blast this out. I want everyone in the world to know this. Number one, what we were saying before, you do not attempt to white hat a protocol without consent from the team or the responsible party of the protocol, unless you see a transaction in the mempool and you front run it. That is the only option. Number
Even
two,
then, you're taking legal risks.
and even then, yes.
But even then, you'll probably be fine in this industry. Probably.
Yes. Even then, you're taking legal risks, but you can actually point to their failed transaction or whatever. Hey, look, I did this to front run them. But the instant you have the money, if you start to negotiate for a reward, you are now a black hat.
Yep.
If you do attempt the white hat, it is because you are naive, and we will all poke fun at you for being a noob. It's for anybody who's done that historically, it's okay. You didn't know that. Now you will know that. It's if you white hat the protocol without their consent, it is due to you being naive. So now we know that. Now the world will know that. That is the new norm. Do not do that. Otherwise, we'll tell you you are a noob.
Yep. And then let's say one more scenario. Sorry.
Yes.
If you for some reason feel you need to white hat it and pull those funds out, there's always the option of you sending it immediately to a community multisig or something that you can identify as theirs. So at least you can show intent that you were never taking it for yourself.
Okay, so there's this one extra caveat, good point, that will make you a very light gray hat. Probably a white hat. But if for whatever reason, because again, none of this is black and white, even though we're trying to make black and white statements here, if you do have to white hat it, ideally there's a place for you to send it directly back to the protocol for them to access. They have some type of thing that's set up. That's actually really interesting. We don't see a lot of those set up. I don't know. I feel like most protocols do not have those set up. And then, we were talking a little bit about like the legal like a safe harbor rule, and we don't really have one in Web3, and some people are working on it, and it's, or are they? I don't know. But in any case, so if you do send it to a community pool, but TLDR, if you white hat, you're either a noob or you're a gray hat, and you don't want to be either. So I just don't white hat. That's so easy, right?
I mean, when it comes to white hats, to me they report bugs. They don't exploit bugs.
Report bugs, don't exploit bugs. Love that. Fantastic. It can be very difficult when you're staring, $500 million exploit in the face. It can be super, super difficult. But this is where we're both going to urge anybody who's listening. Hopefully, we get this message out. Don't do it. It's going to be tempting. You're going to think you're saving. The pressure is going to be on. Get in contact with the right people and do it that way. And that's probably going to be the hardest part, is making sure you are on a secure channel with the right people. Do not let deep fakes fake you out. Spend the time there. I'm like, I actually love that we have a couple of concrete things here. Okay, so on the rewards bit. So a lot of people in the industry have been saying, hey, there would be less black hats if your bug bounties were higher. How much credibility is there to those statements?
I think there's a little bit, but it's definitely one that has to be approached carefully, because I think there's an exponential curve, I think, where you see a lot of people that are white hats, and I think there's very few people out there that would genuinely be a white hat, or that are white hat today, but would be black hat tomorrow if the bug bounties weren't there. I think very few people that are. I think there's not a lot of overlap. There might be some, but I think that's one thing to keep in mind. But I do think the amount of white hats you have looking at it before a black hat finds it is definitely to be considered. And so more rewards will increase more eyes on code for sure, and get ahead of a black hat, because a black hat does take a lot of financial risk. They take a lot of legal risk. They could even try to attack it, and then the transaction fails, and they spend a lot of gas depending on how they did it. So yeah, I do think a good bug bounty program is important. I think there is some corresponding to TVL to some extent is important, to say, okay, we have this much funds at risk potentially. This is how much we potentially pay out, but I still think there's reasonable maximums you can set on that. Like the crypto industry in general has always been much higher payouts than what you would get in traditional Web 2, because Web 2 is in the same boat, but even with much more stronger script, like, let's say corporate expectations that we don't want to encourage people to exploit our code or be looking for bugs. Whether who agrees with that or not, I think is an open question. But for me, yeah, I would say like 10% is a number a lot of people settle around of like, well, 10% of TVL is what you should be willing to pay out the maximum. And I think that's not a bad rule. It's still, I think there are still times, especially for very large protocols, where you could still set a hard cap on that. And I still think they would be very reasonable. And it just comes out of your security budget. Like, and I think the biggest thing is just starting, if you start out with a bug bounty program, just look at what's our TVL, what's our budget, what can we reasonably expect while still having money, to pay for the pre-audits and post security and having our own security team doing their own reviews, and just having all that set up ahead of time. And then thinking, okay, as time goes on and our protocol grows and our budget grows and TVL grows, we slowly reevaluate, maybe adjust those bug bounty payouts over time. But yeah, coming back to the original question, I do think that um, just because a project has low payouts, I mean, for example, Ethereum Foundation does not pay out very large for their bug bounty program, even though the impact is potentially larger than any one DeFi protocol. But they're a nonprofit and they're doing a lot of things that have limited budgets and they have to think more carefully about. So I wouldn't judge a project harshly just for having a lower bug bounty payout than you would otherwise like, because that's ultimately their choice and option. Um, and the risk they take is that just less people will be looking at their code to protect it as opposed to exploit it. That's a risk they're taking, but I would never blame a project, even one that has no bug bounty program, to say you were asking for it. But I would say maybe that wasn't the best allocation of risk.
Right. So I've heard the 10% TVL with some type of cap also tossed around a little bit, but I almost feel like no matter what, anytime I see a black hat now, I just see on Twitter this rain of security people going, "Oh, if only the bug bounties were higher, this black hat wouldn't have." And I almost feel like that's too easy of a cop out, and it's I guess it's hard to say without the data. It's hard to even get data on this, right? Oh, well, what if the bug bounties were double? Like, would they have gotten hacked? But then you'll see, like, oh, they have $10 million TVL and they only had a $50,000 bug bounty or whatever. It sounds like this is another, hey, it's tough to say.
Well,
Try to
and I mean, let's just say this. Do you think North Korea is going to go through the bug bounty program? They're a large part. The Lazarus Group has definitely been a known part of some hacks, and it's like, unless they can find someone to front them on the KYC side, like they're likely not. That's their only route. It doesn't matter how high the
yeah.
bug bounty is. They're probably going to want to exploit it because they also know and have probably the operation set up to try to launder most of it. So for some, yeah, there's plenty of black hats that will never care about how
Yep.
high the bug bounty is. They'll always prefer to exploit because that is their preferred take. And some people like the rush. I mean, you saw, I think the Kyber
Yep.
like exploiter, and he was just on a ego trip. He was loving it.
We've seen some maniacs in Web3, like just DMing about make me the president of your protocol and just ridiculous. How much of that is just like them playing around versus making serious? Who knows? But in any case, so we have a few minutes left here. I would love to, if we have time, go through two scenarios that you've actually been through. Obviously, you don't anything you can't share. You can't share. But are there two scenarios? One where a live vulnerability that went perfectly, you checked or as well as it could have gone, you were like, we did this really well. And is there one that went not so well? Maybe you weren't a part of it, maybe you saw it and you said, holy shit, here's all the things they did wrong. Maybe don't name names, we don't have to pick on them. But can we walk through, in the few minutes that we have, one fantastically done live exploit and one maybe very poorly done live vulnerability?
Ooh, I mean, I'll pick one of mine just because I can pick that off the top of my head for a good one. I think I think TUSD went as well as it could. I think we did a lot of things to prepare for
Which
a lot of
one?
different the TUSD integration issue that we
Yeah,
had.
gotcha.
So no impact on chain, no issues. We didn't even have to go through governance in the end. We were able to get TUSD to resolve it on their side, help them with the fix. So
So the
I'm
bit
happy
with
with how that went.
the double entry point token.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And I can drop a link to that in the chat
Yeah.
afterwards
The
because
other cool thing about that is that now has kind of been immortalized, and every security researcher, okay, weird ERC20, check for double entry points. I've actually used it on one of my earlier competitive audits to find a bug. Felt really good about that. But yeah, the one silver lining to all of these is when these do blow up, it does go, hey, security researchers, this is the new floor. This is the new bug you need to know about. You need to be aware of this, and you should check this out. All right, cool.
Yep.
Let me
Yeah, and I
post
think
this in.
there are things we could have improved in terms of like, hey, this is how we should have evaluated asset listings ahead of time, and other things we learned from that. So that isn't to say there are things before that that I wouldn't have wanted to improve on, but I think like once we found out, okay, this is the criticality we're working with, then I think everything we did from there on out went as well as I could have expected. Um, I guess there's another one that I'll just mention. Uh, I guess with Third Web, what I would have hoped to have done better with that, that we were involved in, is I just wish that we could have gotten more information on it early up front. I think that I think the Third Web team actually still did their best and put a lot of time into trying to find affected projects. So, I mean, all credit to them. They put in a lot of hours to track it down. I think the core missing piece there, and the thing that I wish we could have done better, is the community organization around the issue. Like we were able to say, okay, hey, we brought in a few people that could work with us, specifically DDoB and Ironblocks, to kind of help us coordinate like how do we track down all these contracts? They had a lot of great monitoring tools that came in. We were able to reach out to a lot of different ecosystems, like who's running Matter Labs, who's running Scroll, who's at the EF that understands how these account abstraction systems work. So we did a lot of work, but there were times where like, hey, some team found out only 6 months later than this other team, and there's like a bit of information that wasn't clear, and it was because we just didn't have all the context to share immediately. We had to go out and confirm who we were talking to and share the details discreetly. So I would love an option, and I think this is the lesson I'm taking away from that whole thing, is the ability to have everyone on speed dial, and every project categorized by type, to just say, okay, everyone who uses this feature, or everyone that's who's a compound fork, or everyone who is using this part of our library, where are the contacts, the security contacts, and how do we reach out to them as quickly as possible, and just hit mass send, and with a known like expectation of this bug is a code yellow or a code blue, which means like it's not public yet, so please fix discreetly and please share with only these sorts of parties, and having all that prepared. And there is a group that I know that's working on that, which is essentially an ISAC. That's what other industries have, which is just a way for common parties to share information securely and discreetly. So I hope we have that in our industry established soon. But even then, it's going to be hard to track everyone down.
Right. So then, final question in the last minute we have, and then we'll wrap up. Is there a bad vulnerability that you can walk us through? Or, excuse me, bad vulnerability, a vulnerability where it didn't go so hot? What was the not so hot? I mean, I guess we talked about the third one issue where it's like, hey, it would have been nice to get information a little bit quicker. Is there one where it was like, this was just a disaster?
I mean, I think I'll probably go back to the parody one. Like everything about that was, I mean, it was literally magnitudes worse. The fix was worse than the original bug, and it led to a higher loss of funds. Like I look at that as like a real turning point for the industry to say, okay, just because someone is an expert in the EVM, and I don't think Gavin Wood was directly involved in the code, but it was still his company, his reputation. That don't take that for granted. And if you're putting out a fix, really think about the implications of that fix. Think about for a lot of projects out there that might use someone's code, think about, everyone was using the parity multisig. It was a library, which also meant, going back to upgradeability, that when they changed the library, they were all going to be impacted. And not that anyone was looking at the fix itself, but yeah, I mean, it just came down to the fact that the cure was worse than the disease, and it had such a massive impact, and got people talking about another hard fork. And luckily, we didn't go down that road again. But it was I think it was a serious lesson that there's going to need to be, even the smartest people in the room are going to need to follow some really boring security policies and practices to protect, their code from hurting people at the end of the day. And that's ultimately what we have to worry about whenever we're writing code or whenever we're reviewing code, is like, from an ethical perspective, is this going to harm someone even unintentionally? And there's not maybe like, separate legal requirements in MIT code. Yeah, it's great. Protect yourself. It's all open source, user and risk. But like from an ethical perspective, am I doing something, and am I building something that someone's going to be able to use safely, whether it's a foot gun or a mistake or anything? And you'll never protect against all of it. So that's not to say we're responsible, but did you do your best? That's the real question at the end of the day.
Did you do your best? And did you try to do the most ethical bits? Did you try to stay and do what was right for everybody? Makes sense. Cool. Well, we're at time here. thank you so much. This was phenomenal. I actually took a bunch of notes that I'm going to be including in some content coming up. This was phenomenal. This was great. Don't white hat protocols. If you do, you are now a gray hat. Probably, maybe there are some asterisks there. But in general, don't do it. Get in contact with the protocol. Work it out with them. Work with people that you are absolutely sure are the correct people. Figure out a patch. Figure out what to do from there. And it can be very difficult, very stressful. Good luck. I hope none of you end up in that situation. However, some of you will end up in that situation one day because that's the nature of the business. But you now learned a lot more on what to expect. So hopefully you'll use this information to be better prepared for when that comes. Michael, thank you so much for this call. And thank you all for watching.
Thank you for having me. Talk to you later, Patrick.